Imagine waking up one morning and every black family in your town is just gone. In 1912, that's exactly what happened in Forsyth County, Georgia. Over 1,100 black residents were driven out by white mobs in a calculated purge. Homes were torched, churches burned to the ground, and property seized, with no trials, no protests, and no justice. Local newspapers didn't call it terrorism. They called it cleaning house. The result? A 100% white county that stayed that way for nearly 75 years. That's not migration, that's erasure. This wasn't just about violence, it was about control, and the silence afterward was just as deadly as the flames. If you want to understand Lake Lanier's dark reputation today, you have to start with the vanishing of Oscarville. Buried truth always resurfaces. Before it was swallowed by water, Oscarville was alive with ambition. It was a tight-knit, self-sustaining black community, with churches, farms, schools, and businesses. Families owned land, children attended school, generations built futures there. This wasn't a shanty town, it was black excellence in rural Georgia, and in the Jim Crow South, success painted a target. When black prosperity grew, white resentment followed, fast and loud. Progress invites pride, but it also provokes power. The people of Oscarville weren't just victims, they were builders, and that made what came next not just tragic, but strategic. When history erases a town, it usually starts by erasing its achievements. First they bury the story, then they flood the evidence. How does one crime lead to the destruction of an entire town? In 1912, the brutal assault and death of 18-year-old May Crow shocked Forsyth County, and white anger boiled over. 3 black teenagers were accused: Ernest Knox, Oscar Daniel, and Rob Edwards. There was no physical evidence, just confessions extracted under duress, likely through beatings. Rob Edwards never even made it to trial. A lynch mob dragged him from jail and shot him on the courthouse square. Thousands gathered, treating it like a community spectacle. That wasn't justice, that was theater. The other 2 boys were convicted and hanged after a rushed trial. But the real fallout came afterward, when mobs used the crime to justify ethnic cleansing. One tragedy became the spark. The fire had already been waiting. Imagine your grandparents being told, "Leave by sunrise or die." That was the reality for black families in Forsyth after the lynching of Rob Edwards. White vigilantes calling themselves night riders went door to door, shooting into homes, torching churches, and leaving threatening messages. Sometimes they gave families hours to pack. Often they didn't bother. Black residents fled with what they could carry, and many never came back. No arrests, no legal proceedings, just a community vanishing under threat of death. This wasn't fear, it was forced exile.
Direct descendants like George Rucker, who can trace his family back 4 generations to Oscarville. He tells the story of his great-grandfather, Bert Oliver, and the entire family being forced off their land.
Night riders came through. They had to leave everything. The main thing they left was property, and my grandfather had 100 acres.
Rucker says many relatives died as they tried to flee.
So when they got to the Chattahoochee River, from what I understand, they were told, when the mob got up on the bridge, they were told that they either had to swim or drown. Most of them didn't make it. My grandfather, one of them that did make it, he lost some brothers and sisters.
He says his relatives who survived settled in Gainesville.
From what my mother told me, Bert Oliver, he would sit and tell her this story, and he would just sit and cry.
Crosby says whites in the area took over the remaining properties. She says Oscarville farmers were specifically skilled in raising poultry, which set the pace for Gainesville eventually becoming poultry capital of the world.
You have a farm already going, and you had free land. So you just take it.
Rucker says his great-grandfather married his second wife, Beulah, and they built this school that still stands in Gainesville today.
The violence didn't stop at property lines. It followed people across county borders. And it worked. Forsyth became known as a sundown county where black people simply did not live. Terror doesn't need laws when silence is louder. You don't need a gun to steal someone's legacy, just a deed. When Forsyth's black residents fled in terror, they left behind farms, homes, and businesses. But the county didn't protect those properties, it absorbed them. White neighbors claimed abandoned land through forged sales, fraudulent auctions, or simple squatting. Official records from the time show mysterious transfers and missing paperwork. Some families tried returning decades later, only to find their land legally owned by someone else. Wealth isn't just earned, it's inherited or erased. The economic blow stretched generations. What could have become college funds, family homes, or retirement savings was turned into lakeside real estate. No bombs, no banks, just silence, paperwork, and a door that never reopened. Now imagine this. Decades later, the government decides to flood the town you were forced to flee. In the 1950s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began creating Lake Lanier to supply water and power to Atlanta. To do it, they dammed the Chattahoochee River and submerged entire communities, including what remained of Oscarville. Roads, homes, churches, and unmarked cemeteries were left beneath the rising water. While some structures were bulldozed, many were simply left. Even now, divers report entire building foundations, debris fields, and grave markers still intact beneath the lake's surface. You can't flood injustice without consequences. Lake Lanier became a weekend getaway, built on buried trauma, and few questioned why Oscarville had no voice in the planning, because to them, it already didn't exist. Some lakes hold fish and memories, others hold secrets and silence. Since its creation, Lake Lanier has earned a haunting reputation.
Now at 11, in the last couple of hours, folks, we have learned about a body found in Lake Lanier.
11 people have died in drowning or boating accidents on Lake Lanier this year.
The deadliest day on Lake Lanier was actually in the heart of the winter.
And Caitlin Ross now takes us back to Christmas Day 1964, when one of Atlanta's favorite lakes became a site of a watery tragedy.
Labor Day weekend is the traditional end of summer on Lake Lanier. So far this year on that lake, 11 people have drowned or died in boating accidents. While it may not seem like a lot of numbers, that's the average, with hundreds of lives lost since the lake was formed in the 50s.
Over 700 people have died in its waters, more than any other man-made lake in the U.S. Boaters report sudden waves in calm conditions, unexplained mechanical failures, and powerful undercurrents that appear without warning. Local rescue teams call it unpredictable. Residents call it cursed. But what if the danger isn't just physical, but historical? Disturbance lingers where truth was never laid to rest. Because this isn't just about drowning, it's about displacement. You can build over a community, but you can't bury what was never resolved. And maybe, just maybe, the lake is still trying to speak. A lake built on stolen land, a town erased with no apology. Locals whisper about ghosts, but the real hauntings are documented. Families still don't know where their ancestors are buried. Graves were relocated, but records are unreliable. Many tombstones were left behind, some still visible under deep water when the lake levels drop. But the real curse isn't supernatural, it's systemic, a legacy of injustice, untouched and largely unspoken. Cover-ups don't need conspiracy, just indifference. When people drown in Lake Lanier, the media blames alcohol, speed, or poor decisions. But the bigger story of buried history rarely makes the surface. We don't need ghosts to feel unsettled. We just need the truth. History isn't what happened, it's what gets remembered. Henry Louis Gates, Jr. Oscarville doesn't appear on most Georgia tourism maps. There's no monument, no museum, no formal state recognition of what was lost. Schools in the region still teach Lake Lanier's engineering marvel, not its human cost. Local officials rarely acknowledge the 1912 purge. Some deny it happened at all. This isn't accidental. It's historical whiteout. Erasure doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it's just omission, but descendants are speaking out, and digital records are helping reconstruct the past. What's buried beneath the lake can still surface, if we let it. Truth doesn't vanish. It waits for a witness. Picture organizing a family reunion and realizing your ancestral home is underwater. That's the reality for descendants of Oscarville, who have spent years pushing for historical recognition. Community leaders have requested memorials, historical markers, even land acknowledgements. But progress is slow. There's no clear government process for reclaiming or honoring land taken under racial terror. And because so much documentation was lost, courts rarely recognize their claims. Still, they persist, gathering oral histories, preserving church records, and mapping grave sites. Justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied. What happens when an entire county becomes a warning sign? After the 1912 purge, Forsyth didn't just stay white, it made sure it did. For decades, black travelers were warned to avoid the area after dark. It became an unofficial sundown county, part of a wider network of exclusion zones across the South. Signs weren't always posted. The threat was understood. Even as late as the 1980s, Forsyth had no black residents. Fear built borders without fences. It took national media attention and protests led by civil rights leaders to finally force change. But while the demographics shifted, the deeper legacy stayed buried. Exclusion wasn't just a moment, it was a method. In 1987, civil rights icon Hosea Williams tried to break Forsyth's silence and almost got lynched. He organized a peaceful march through Cumming, Georgia, the county seat. The result? Dozens of white supremacists showed up, throwing rocks, shouting slurs, and threatening marchers. News crews captured the chaos, and suddenly the world was watching Forsyth again. The next week, 20,000 people, black, white, and allies, returned for a second march, this time protected by state troopers. It was one of the largest civil rights demonstrations since the 60s. The ghosts weren't gone, they'd just been quiet. Williams' march forced America to confront a truth. Racism doesn't need a century to resurface, just a microphone and a moment. And Forsyth wasn't ready for either. Built on stolen land, Lake Lanier now generates over $5 billion a year. It's one of Georgia's top tourist destinations, attracting millions annually for boating, fishing, and vacation homes. But none of that wealth flows to the descendants of Oscarville. The same government that ignored black property rights now profits from the erasure. Local businesses thrive. Waterfront property values soar. Meanwhile, families who once lived on that land still struggle for recognition, let alone restitution. Profit doesn't care who paid the price. Oscarville could have been a thriving black town, maybe a second Tulsa. Instead, it became a ghost and a gold mine. Justice wasn't just stolen, it was monetized. When 90-year-old Bessie Daniels returned to Forsyth, she cried at the water's edge. Her parents had fled Oscarville in 1912. She'd heard the stories growing up, whispers about fire, fear, and fleeing in the night. For decades, she believed she'd never see her family's land again. But in her final years, she stood by Lake Lanier, knowing her grandparents were likely buried beneath its calm surface. Survivors and their families are now breaking generational silence, sharing what history books ignored. Church records, land deeds, oral histories. Piece by piece, Oscarville's story is being rebuilt. Silence kept them hidden. Stories bring them back. They're not asking for pity. They're asking for memory. And memory is power. Ever noticed how many horror movies feature haunted lakes, sunken towns, or cursed water? From Pet Sematary to Deliverance to the Skeleton Key, Southern Gothic horror often echoes real historical trauma. But rarely do these films name the truths they're built on, like Oscarville. Instead, trauma becomes aesthetic. It's easier to sell ghosts than injustice. And Lake Lanier, it's become internet legend, the real-life haunted lake. TikToks go viral, podcasts speculate, but the real story stays untold. Ghosts trend, victims vanish. The danger isn't supernatural. It's forgetting that this was real. And if we romanticize the ruin, we risk repeating the silence. Some say healing can't happen until you name the wound. Lake Lanier will never be drained. Oscarville will never rise again. But recognition is possible. Imagine historical markers on the shore, a memorial by the dam, descendants on city planning boards, reparative scholarships funded by lake tourism profits, small acts but with deep roots. The future doesn't fix the past, but it can honor it. Other communities have begun this process: Rosewood, Tulsa, Wilmington. So why not Oscarville? What's stopping Georgia from honoring the town it drowned? Picture standing on the shore of Lake Lanier, sun bright, boats humming, and realizing you're looking down at an entire, erased world. Oscarville isn't just history. It's a test of what a nation remembers and what it lets drown. This wasn't a mystery. It was a message. And that message still echoes today in policies, property lines, and the silence that follows injustice. But silence is a choice. So is remembering. We can't raise the town, but we can raise the truth. And truth, when shared, doesn't just haunt, it heals. Oscarville isn't the only town beneath water. From California's flooded black resorts to Tennessee's sunken indigenous villages, America has a long history of vanishing communities. This was Phantom Towns. Want to uncover more stories like this of lost places, submerged cities, and the towns America tried to erase? Hit subscribe and share this with someone who thinks history is just the past. And drop a name of a lost town we should cover next.